ones.
That one we had the board over there, like the handle, the minute hand
What?
broke,
Yesterday.
kept falling. So it was always the half hour. The hour hand still worked. There was always something 30. And then,
Yeah, but incarcerated people don't get to see outside. Right. No, the other one, the last name is, oh, why is it? Something, that must be on the fence down. Oh, okay, I just did too, I was supposed to do it for you. Oh,
Okay, thank you. Meetings of the Johnson County Board of Supervisors are open to the public and are generally live streamed. To join electronically, please visit bit.ly/JOCO meeting. Written comments may be submitted to soups@johnsoncountyiowa.gov. If you require accommodation to participate, please contact the board office on 319-356-6000 prior to the meeting. Public comment is at the discretion of the chair. Comments should be limited to 3 minutes. Due to public meeting laws, the board may only discuss or act on matters presented on this agenda. Welcome. We'll come to order. It is 3:31 in the afternoon. Today is Thursday, September 11th, 2025. This is a meeting of the Johnson County Board of Supervisors sitting as the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. First item is public comment. Good afternoon, folks. Anyone with public comment today? Please come to the podium, introduce yourself, and please limit yourself to 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Morgan Sauce. I am a resident of Iowa City, and I am here to speak against the formation of a new jail from a public health perspective. I want to give everybody a couple basic facts about the public health crisis we are currently facing. In 2024, the American Public Health Association declared the current state of incarceration in the U.S. to be a public health crisis. Incarcerated people already had a higher health risk prior to the onset of the COVID pandemic due to poor facility conditions, such as poor water quality, lack of air conditioning, shared facilities like bathrooms and cafeterias, overcrowding, and inability or refusal to treat incarcerated people's medical needs, despite their healthcare needs being enshrined in the 8th Amendment. Early on in the COVID pandemic, prisons were absolutely devastated by unmitigated COVID spread. Both incarcerated people and jail employees were not given adequate PPE to prevent this. People in higher health risk populations are disproportionately incarcerated, including right here in Johnson County. These are groups that historically have had barriers to accessing healthcare already, exacerbating health inequalities, especially racial health inequalities. 40 to 50% of COVID cases have no symptoms, meaning you can get COVID, have COVID, and give other people COVID without knowing it. Even cases with no symptoms can result in what's called long COVID, which also disproportionately affects incarcerated people. There is no way to socially distance or quarantine in a jail that does not amount to intense psychological torture in the form of prolonged solitary confinement. Michael Carvajal, the BOP, the Federal Bureau of Prisons Director in 2020 said, "Prisons by design are not made for social distancing. They are, on the opposite, made to contain people." No amount of anti-recidivism, counseling, or rehabilitation programs will stop the damage of COVID in our jails, prisons, or otherwise holding cells. We need to keep our most vulnerable safe, and that means mandatory twice-a-year vaccinations and N95s for jail employees who are commonly the vector of outbreaks of respiratory disease in prisons, and proper ventilation in every single room of one of these facilities using HEPA filters. PPE like N95 should also be readily available for all incarcerated people. Readily available for all incarcerated people at any time. If you are not accounting for adequately preventing respiratory diseases in your facilities, you are actively endangering the public by spreading disease to and from facilities through staff members not taking mitigations or outright refusing to do so. No matter what punishment an incarcerated or detained person receives, subjecting them to Respiratory disease during an ongoing pandemic is an extrajudicial death sentence. Making a new jail while repeating the same mistakes will only endanger our community further. Remember, public health requires all of us to step up. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Additional public comment.
Hey, my name is Izzy Kibbis. I live in Iowa City. I am a resident in Iowa City. I also own property in Iowa City. I have a house. So my property taxes are going towards everything that has to do with this budget, including a new jail. I don't want to see an $80 million new jail. And I find it disingenuous that the survey that was made public, when polling the public about it, did not mention the price tag. It just mentioned a new jail. And I think you saw the amount of support you saw, which is still not like a vast majority, but was a majority of the public that were asked. They were not like told the price tag. I figure if you ask questions a certain way, you'll get polling responses a certain way. I think it's important to ask like honest questions and inform the public on the cost of these policies as we vote on them. So yeah, also crime is on the decline. So we should not be increasing the amount of jails to compensate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment?
Oh, okay. My name is Nix. I live in Iowa City. Sorry if I'm not like eloquently spoken today. I've been helping the people who live that are homeless in your community that are being displaced outside of Shelter House. I've been moving them, giving them boxes, water all day today. Haven't seen any of you there. So that's disappointing. Also, the rest of my week has been spent at a trial for a dear friend of mine who the state is trying to cage forever, indefinitely. So since we're talking about cages here, which is a jail, I just want to bring attention to some concerns I have. Just that I'm a little bit upset to hear that, you know, there's been all this funding done for a study for a new jail. No funding done for a study on how to maybe update the old jail. That's not been done at all that I know of. Yeah, so, you know, as a group of organizations, advocates, and concerned citizens, we share a belief that allocating resources to incarceration while people's basic needs, including housing, food, and adequate mental health care, remain unmet does not make our community safer. We also believe that our community must treat people who are incarcerated with dignity and care. Based on these values, our paramount concerns with regard to our local jail are to reduce the number of people incarcerated whenever possible, and to ensure that more resources are allocated to caring for our community members than are allocated to incarcerating them. We oppose any new jail, and these are demands for updating the existing jail. The Johnson County Jail must never contract with other law enforcement agencies to house inmates for payment. An update must not include extra bed space under the guise of anticipating, quote, rising demand. 3, an update must increase access to counsel, meaning in-person meeting spaces without physical barriers. 4, an update must include increased access to visitation not conducted through video screens. The Johnson County Jail should offer free, cost-free phone calls to incarcerated people. The Johnson County Jail must facilitate access to community resources such as mobile crisis response for incarcerated people. And the county must make a concurrent financial commitment to jail alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Nix, do you have that list printed or could you email that list?
Sure.
Might be helpful for us to have a copy of what you're talking about.
Yep.
Thank you.
Is there any additional public comment? Any additional public comment? Any additional public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item B, CJCC business. Item B1 is discuss outcomes from joint meeting of September 10th, 2025 between the City of Iowa City, Johnson County Sheriff, and Johnson County Board of Supervisors. Sheriff, do you have any initial reactions you want to offer? You're first on the agenda.
Yeah, we met last night. If any watched the news coverage or had a chance to watch the meeting, but yeah, we had that initial launchpad discussion with the city. The ball is kind of in their court now if they're interested in pursuing something as a joint facility, or if they're opt not to for their own reasons. And then one way or the other, I think we'll know pretty soon what's the direction of the county. So, either way, I'm happy to know that we're at a point where we can really get a sense of where we're heading, because as we know, time is also a concern for everybody involved, and one way or the other, we need to know the direction. So it was good discussion. It was nice to hear their concerns and questions and kind of get the temperature for where the city's at on the idea. But I'm optimistic one way or the other that we will know the path pretty soon.
Yeah, I would just add that, where is Ryan? I was expecting Assistant County Attorney Ryan Moss to replay the same presentation that we had last evening about the mechanics of how the joint authority could potentially work. And I'm looking forward to that. I think I could probably mumble through it if Ryan isn't able to join us this afternoon. We also have some additional information that we received from him late this morning as to the membership of that commission that I think is helpful, considering some of the concerns that we heard last night. Anyone else, any other supervisors have anything, any other members of the committee?
I just wanted to share, and there are a couple members of the Iowa City Council in here right now, and maybe if they're willing to be put on the spot, but I got the impression yesterday that there was a little bit of concern about, well, I think they're taking this up on Tuesday. And I think there was a little bit of, well, maybe that's too quick. But I don't think the board or anybody associated with Johnson County has set any kind of deadline of Tuesday. So, I mean, if for whatever reason, I think they need more information or more time, we're not opposed to that. I mean, obviously, there's a certain point at which we need to get a response, but it's not Tuesday. Is that fair to say? Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think that there was a lot of concern around not having enough time to digest information, which is completely understandable, and, would welcome another, I think there was another email about another joint session even to discuss again, any of the concerns.
Just so everybody's clear that that's not an expectation that we have, that you guys act on Tuesday. And no, we do have an expectation, I guess, that you act relatively soon, but it doesn't have to be that quickly.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we want to ensure that everybody, both the council members, but also your constituents, have sufficient information to make a good decision, and for you folks to be able to explain whatever decision, whatever votes you individually take. As fellow elected officials, we absolutely understand the importance of being well informed when making these big decisions that are going to, affect the built environment of Johnson County for decades to come. Certainly also the financial implications. Any additional comments from last night? Please, would you mind just coming up?
I'm Laura Burgess, city council member for Iowa City. And just to clarify, the reason that it's Tuesday, which is so soon after our Wednesday joint session, is because that is our only scheduled meeting in the month of September between now and the deadline that was communicated to us in your resolution of inquiry of October 1st. So I just want to make that clear that we weren't trying to say you all made us, meet on Tuesday. It's just that it's very unusual for the city council to call additional meetings, and we only meet twice per month. So
That's helpful.
that's why Tuesday and not later.
Lord, you meet, is it the first and third or second?
And third Tuesday.
So you meet October 7th.
Mhm.
So
I
we could live with that.
am
I'm
going
sure.
to go out on a limb and say that even though the resolution countenances October 1st, that if you want to wait until October 7th, that would be fine. We would rather have to work a little bit faster on the back end with a good decision that everybody is comfortable with. And as the chair, I accept responsibility for the oversight of not familiarizing myself with the cadence of your meetings when I inserted that date into the resolution. So please take that back to your colleagues. I will also transmit that to Mr. Fruin.
Thank you.
The only other thing that I would note, our contract with Shive Hattery contemplates 2 additional public presentations from those folks. And I did offer Mr. Fruin, if the city wishes to have Shive Hattery come in either next Tuesday or on the 7th, if you folks feel like that would be advantageous for your fact finding, you're welcome to do so. Any additional comments about last night?
Well, I know we're going to get into the articles of incorporation next, but I just did want to bring that up as, that is, and I'm sure will remain a point of, I don't want to say contention, but concern for sure, I think on both sides, right? I mean, when we look at having to form another authority, it takes away the authority of in a way, it lessens potentially our ultimate impact on the project. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that was a big point that we came to last night, was really trying to dig into what are those articles of incorporation, but also the bylaws. And I know we received and thank you, Councilor Burgess, for sending us an email, outlining some of those concerns. I have a feeling, that's what came up a lot last night, and I'm sure we'll continue to field some communication there. But I think that it's, worth repeating that is something that is new in my term, to create a new authority for something of this magnitude. When we talk about particularly in Johnson County and housing it in Iowa City, this is something that has failed several times, so, it's just a very high profile facility. We're not, building a pool, right? So I think that it's worth noting that this is something that is going to have to take like 10 under gloves. I know, that's not so true. I shouldn't say that. Actually, it's a terrible example, actually. We're not building a playground. I should say, I'm sorry, yeah. I know. As soon as that came out of my mouth, I was like, man, that's a terrible example. Sorry about that. But so I just want to say that we, despite, all jokes aside, like that, I think we all take that very seriously. And I know that we all need to take time to figure out what does that exactly look like and what would be the potential ramifications. We know that there were real tough pills to swallow in Woodbury County, like some serious things that they felt got away from them. And, how do we, plan for that, or can we plan for that? So I think, there were some great questions raised in that meeting, and then also in Councilor Burgess's email that I think that we do need to dig into. We would be remiss if we didn't, and I know that we will. I guess.
At the end of the day, we need to agree to, well, what's the scope of the authority of this? You could call the authority, you could replace that with commission. It's the same thing. Just because it is the authority doesn't mean it has the authority. And that's where the agreement we need to come to is, well, what's the scope of their responsibility? And as the mechanism for getting this to a referendum, that's where, the devil's in the details. But as John mentioned last night, a takeaway I think we all had from Woodbury County was, if you don't clearly define and really narrow the scope on the front end, it creates those problems for years to come in the operation of the building. And you don't want to be having arguments with the occupants or with the authority 5 years later about what color you want to paint the bathroom, or the specific example they had was putting a vending machine in for the staff. But that's literally what they were dealing with, because those decisions weren't hammered out when they formalized and organized the authority. So the bylaws do need to be very narrow, and everybody needs to be clear up front. What's the role of this in as getting the building to completion? And then where does that authority stop when it comes to operation and administrative decisions within the building?
Any additional discussion?
Well, I just kind of want to, and we kind of ran out of time last night a little bit. So there's a couple of like timeline and expectation clarification questions I had. So I'm sort of, if you don't mind if I bat a little bit of cleanup from last night. So what, and again, also with terms of timing, our agenda packet doesn't come out till Thursday evening. So there's some of these questions are answered in there, and I just haven't had a chance to see it yet. I have apologies up front. In terms of what's being, just so everybody kind of knows, and this is probably good for the public information too, and hopefully my understanding is correct. The next step we're looking for from the city council is basically not in a formal approval of this commission or authority, because we don't have all that, we don't be voting on yet. It's more of a, do we feel like we are interested enough to pursue going through the negotiation process? So Hypothetically, if the council, majority of the council says, yes, we want to move forward, the next step would be for basically city staff and county staff to start working on hammering out these details. So our various legal things, entities and appointees, figuring out what that looks like. So some of the questions that we have, some of the concerns that we have right now are, very important, but we don't actually know yet because the two different entities haven't started really doing those sit-down legal city department negotiations. That would be the next step, should we?
And, I want to be sensitive to the fact that the city is structured differently than the county. But I do wonder, you're absolutely correct, but I do wonder if it would not behoove the city to ask your city attorney folks to begin working on through some of these questions, even before you folks necessarily do your head nods or informal agreement to move forward, because they can help flesh out some of these concerns that all of us have, and settle some of these questions. So much of this has been very tricky, and I alluded to this last evening, trying to figure out what the order of operations is to ensure that we do hit our deadlines, but while also in partnership with the city and giving you folks the opportunity to address and air your concerns, hopefully get them met or resolved. But there's, I think that it probably makes sense for the city to invest some significant staff time with your attorney folks into working through what their level of comfort might be, what their concerns would be, how best to address them, both through the articles of incorporation and then in the bylaws.
That seems like yeah, I mean, I think some of that will depend a little bit too on, and of course, either one of us can speak for all of our colleagues. But sort of when we get to Tuesday's meeting, if we decide, yeah, we've got what we need. If we decide we want to know, we just want to postpone this till the next meeting, the October 7th meeting. I think between now and Tuesday, that's probably not going to be a reasonable lift for, to drop on. But I think that's something, if we decide to push on, I think that would make sense to bring up and discuss. So that's a good point. The last thing I wanted to say, so if we were to decide at our upcoming meeting that we wanted to seriously explore in a very dedicated way the formation of this entity, at some point then after that, we would, as a council, I would imagine, and you as a county board would get a draft. And that would be another point at which we would have a decision making. So my point being, if a decision is made at on our part, this coming meeting or a meeting next, that's not the last time we could say, nope, this is not where we're going. We still have other opportunities to say, we're not fully committed to a final yes, we're fully committed to a process.
And I will ask.
I understand that correctly.
I will ask Ryan when he gives the presentation in just a moment for him to focus and clarify on which steps, what degree of how binding they are.
That's perfect. Yeah, because I think I have an understanding, but I want to make sure my understanding's right. And I know my fellow council members are very much going to be interested in those kinds of answers. So thank you.
I think also too, an understanding of the October deadline and why that is the way it is.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be helpful because when you look at it, we have to have language for in August of 26. It's like, well, is there a reason why we have to have this like why we have to have it signed October? Like, I think that would just be good to have that daylighted in your presentation. Ryan, if you don't mind.
Anything additional before I invite Ryan to give his presentation again? Okay, item B2 this afternoon is presentation on the formation and operations of Joint County City Authority for a Public Safety Facility. Ryan Moss, Deputy Civil Assistant, Johnson County Attorney. Good afternoon, Ryan.
Hello and good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Could we get a little more volume in here, Mark?
And I can lean, it may make my screen face a little awkward, but I can lean closer to perhaps my mic as well. Is that any help?
No, I think the issue is on our end. So I'm going to put the audio on my computer, but that's going to mean that we're going to have to mute the room while you're speaking.
Okay.
That might be as high as it goes.
Say something.
You're going to have to mute the room.
Okay.
How is this? You're probably muted. Is that any better? I'm just going to get started, assuming that it is. And do you have, I believe in the packet are the slides from last night. So perhaps on the screen you want to advance for the folks there. I happen to have it up on my computer here. But maybe both for efficiency's sake and exploring a few points that got raised last night question-wise, I'm going to jump first to just a few things that I jotted down this morning when I got to work about what items do the city council and the board of supervisors get to vote on. And I basically went through the operating statute there, 346-27, and among others, these aren't necessarily in any particular order as far as chronological, and we can talk about that in a second. But the site of the joint facility is an item that each respective governing body has to vote on. The articles of incorporation, as well as possible future amendments to those articles of incorporation, are items upon which the respective governing bodies vote on. As we talked about a little bit last night, selecting that third commissioner is also a decision that has to be reached as between the city and county city council and the county board of supervisors. Beyond that, each governing body has to, of course, agree to a lease at some point in the future with the authority for the space that they intend to occupy. They also, both the city council and the board of supervisors, have to concur in the commission's calling for an election on the issuance of the revenue bonds. So in advance of that August ballot language deadline, there has to really be, the authority has to have worked with bond counsel well in advance to identify all of what needs to go into that ballot question. The authority needs to ultimately come to a decision on that, adopt that, forward that to the city council and the board of supervisors for each body to also then act in concurrence on the commission's call for the ballot question. So really all of that has to happen before that August 2026 date. But that's another thing. To the extent one or more of the entities are going to donate or gratuitously lease property, that's something that the body, of course, would have to vote on. And if not covered in the articles of incorporation, the future disposition of the property or facility years down the road, once the initial revenue bonds that were issued to fund the construction of the facility get retired, paid off, that then opens up the possibility, but not the requirement, the possibility that the facility may get transferred, conveyed, and that's obviously the subject probably of some negotiation either now or 20 years, 30 years from now. But basically each governing body at that point would then have to vote on how and whether the facility gets transferred to the county, to the city, or remains with the authority on kind of an ongoing indefinite basis. By the way, that particular question also has to go on the ballot to the voters, whether to transfer the facility many, many years once the property or once the construction financing has been paid off. That has to also, if it's going to be transferred to an entity like the county, that has to get voted on by the by the voters as well. So those were just some things that I pulled out from the code. And also from, I was alerted, Aaron Shane in the board office forwarded some initial documents from Scott County. So when we're talking about examples out there, apparently Scott County has as well. I see we've got the governance slide up. Yes, really the first step after the city council comes to a resolution on whether to move forward in earnest with this relationship. The next step would be to develop those articles of incorporation. As mentioned last night, I had some examples, or I had several copies of the Woodbury County example. We certainly could look at other counties for inspiration as well. And then, yes, I think it definitely will be the product of both internal professional teams working on it, as well as advancing some preliminary recommendations to the decision makers in each body. So what those articles of incorporation contain, I think, is still an open question. Obviously, the articles of incorporation, to some extent, you don't necessarily, this is based on my experience in private practice, you don't want to cover necessarily every decision in the articles of incorporation, because then in order to do something different, you might need to go do an amendment, which in and of itself can be problematic. Whether that's in a bylaws or a separate agreement as between the city and county, those are different ways to address different discussion questions along the way. And an example of that might be how to handle the costs of ongoing design professional services, so like architect services, long before the authority has any money from revenue bonds to actually pay those bills. Those bills will come due. How does that get sorted out? That's probably an agreement as between the city and county that happens after the authority is constituted, and would include the authority, because the authority probably is going to be engaging those architects, but using city and county contribution funds to pay for those services. So articles of incorporation first to get it constituted. And I think to the question of where did the October 1 date come from, that's from an August, I believe the August minutes of this CJCC body. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, the timeline that was part of the August 14 minutes includes, by October 1st, Board of Supervisors and City Council vote on forming joint entity and appointing commissioners. Like has been discussed a little while ago, the City Council meeting cadence is a little bit different, and we need to account for that, certainly. And otherwise, I think probably that October 1st date was put in there as, hey, we need to be very, very seriously discussing, in order to stay on the timeline, to have all the other things hammered out well in advance of that August 2026 ballot question submission deadline. We need to have that entity in existence so those conversations can really include the entity itself that is going to be doing the construction, obviously with direction from its constituent members. Another thing I wanted to clarify just for the folks there is, indeed, it would appear that the City Council can appoint one of its City Council members as the city's designee to the commission as the commissioner, and likewise the Board of Supervisors representative can be one of the elected county supervisors. So there's no we talked a little bit last night about whether they're irreconcilable offices, at least in the case of Woodbury County, ever since that commission was constituted. They've had both city council members and county supervisors on that commission. So I think going forward, we would consider that to be precedent to permit both bodies to appoint one of their own, if they so chose, as their respective commissioner to the joint authority. Maybe we want to advance the slide. Thanks. So we've been talking a little bit about both this October 1st date, which I would consider, like I said, that was taken from a timeline that I think this body has looked at before, but we need to just account for the reality of when the city council gets together, frankly, when the board of supervisors gets together, and that once the city council has indicated whether or not they want to proceed more in earnest, I believe as Councilmember Harmson may have just mentioned, that's, I think, when we can really roll up our sleeves and come up with a tailored articles of incorporation that at least hopefully is pretty close to the finish line, but obviously needs to account for interests that each respective body has, and then put that in front of the city council and the board of supervisors for discussion and consideration. I think that's so. From the standpoint of what's the October 1st date? Well, I would say sometime around October 1, we should be striving to be moving forward with articles of incorporation for possible future adoption by the respective legislative bodies. And then there's lots to be done. I haven't been through this myself before, but there's lots to be done between then and August 26th. That is going to be informed by the design finalization. I heard last night the architect mention that the cost estimate was based on a construction window of I believe 20 construction season 2027. So those numbers might shift a little bit, but that is all premised essentially on the revenue bond ballot question going to the November 26th general election. And so we and maybe as Chairperson Green has mentioned in previous meetings, we're really reverse engineering or figuring out what that reverse timeline looks like. And so to the extent October 1 is a date, I think we need to strive for something as close as that as possible, acknowledging the importance of having a deliberate, considered approach to composing those articles of incorporation. Next slide. Yeah, so one of the things that didn't make it to the city county obligations is maybe one of the most obvious, and that is providing instructions to their representative on the authority, as well as, ultimately occupying and operating the space. Maybe that goes without saying, but certainly on an ongoing basis, the respective police department and sheriff's office are going to be operating on a daily basis in this facility if it comes to fruition. And so that would be an obligation, but that I suppose to some degree that goes without saying. But the authority itself would be primarily, or at least legally, responsible for the construction, for engaging or putting out for bid the final designs, complying with Iowa's public bidding laws, project managing, I'm sure with input from the constituent government bodies. And then those lease agreements are really the embodiment of how the city and county, and the authority work together for a time horizon of 20 or 30 years to work together and occupy and operate that space. The code, that code section 346.27 lists the various components of what goes into the rent. As I alluded to last night, it's really a function of the construction costs as well as operating any sort of facility. There's ongoing maintenance, capital replacement costs, things like that for any facility. Actually, and the county is realizing that on an annual basis with respect to the current jail and sheriff's office facility, that those are costs that when you reach an end of life scenario become extremely end of physical infrastructure life become increasingly expensive and kind of a patchwork sort of solution. So the lease rental rates would incorporate some set-asides for those capital improvement items, maintenance, and then the debt service. So the interest that's accruing on the initial loans, and then the repaying the principal on those loans over time until they're ultimately retired. But so there's not other stuff in there. That's what the statute prescribes. And then the respective county and city legislative bodies are empowered to levy taxes over and above what might be general statutorily imposed levy rates to finance or to cover the cost of those rentals. And I think what both what was discussed some last night, what will certainly be discussed at the next city council meeting, and probably some after I quit talking here at this meeting are the next steps. And as Chairperson Green mentioned, our team here is prepared to do what we can to facilitate a collaborative composition of those legal documents. As I mentioned last night, at least my personal legal expertise doesn't extend to the intricacies of bond financing. So I think at some point, external experts, both the city and the county, have bond counsel, I presume. I know the county has bond counsel. We'll be reaching out to them at some point in the future, but I'd like to think that some of the basic documentation and drafting can be done in-house with as little delay as possible. So I'm happy to field some questions from the committee, but that's maybe a little bit richer presentation than what we were able to get into last night.
Council are already on.
Sorry, was there a question?
Which honestly, you couldn't pay me enough to do this job, but it's an unpaid position. So I just wanted to, that was something that was discussed last night, and I don't know if we came to anything.
The 3 commissioners are unpaid and must be unpaid. However, the commission can hire and retain staff.
Yeah.
Under the law, but we would have to agree to that in the articles of
Yes.
incorporation.
And yeah, how that's paid.
Yeah.
Like whether it's 50-50 or a different split, right?
If I understand correctly, the law allows for a county board member or a city council member, but does not require it.
Correct.
I wondered, and maybe if the law says if you have, you appoint somebody and they leave office for whatever reason, they lose an election, they decide to leave, do they stay on for the full 6-year term? Does the appointment follow the office or does it follow the person? Does that make sense?
Brian, I see you nodding your head. Can I take that to mean that the appointment follows the person, not the office?
It does follow the person. I would observe, I think recently, one of the Woodbury County, perhaps the city council appointee was no longer going to be serving on the city council and therefore was resigning from the authority. So it may be one of those things where there's just an understanding among both the appointing bodies as well as those holding those commission seats that I'm here as the voice of, say, the city council, and if I'm no longer serving on the city council, it's incumbent on me to resign and make that space available to the city council to appoint a replacement for the remainder of my term. But no, I don't see a legal requirement that, because it isn't tied necessarily to a mandatory council member or supervisor being appointed to that spot.
I was just looking at the Woodbury Articles of Incorporation too, and they have in section 3.4, removal of a commissioner, and a commissioner may be removed from office by the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members of the governing body of the incorporating unit or units that elected the commissioner. They have other things in here, compensation, you can't receive compensation. Like, these are the things that, I mean, these aren't bylaws, obviously that's different, but just looking at the examples that we have, there is that concern about how much authority are we giving. There's also the authority to take that away, right? And to remove a commissioner as well, so.
There you go. Yep.
Another kind of timeline question. So again, speaking hypothetically only, if October 7th, the city council thinks it wants to move forward, obviously if the decision's opposite, then that part of the discussion is over. But if they decide to move forward, what are you thinking in timeline for, like, because then that begins an intensive negotiation and drafting process. Is that a month, 2 months? Is that impossible to really nail down? I don't know if anybody on the county board or the county attorney's office has a feeling for what's a reasonable expectation, because I assume at the end of that drafting negotiation process, that's sort of the final, like, yes, we're going to sign this or agree to this or not. Correct?
Yeah, I also wonder how long it's going to take us to find appointments. Because I feel like you would have to get commissioners, right?
Well,
And then,
yeah, that's a good question. What was the sequence?
right, because would you want to have those people involved in the incorporation? Does that matter? I mean, that's a good question too, because I am also curious, like, just realistically, what is it going to take for us to agree on one person and likewise, and then a third person together
Right.
without like a total bloodbath?
And does that need to happen before we have the articles, or do we form the articles, then get the?
Once the articles are approved by both bodies, that starts a 60-day clock for the third member. I'm assuming, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming that would be the same deadline for the other two appointees.
The 60 days.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually say in there. I think that's, yeah, I would have to double check, but I don't believe it says in there. We could certainly, I think it's definitely a guideline for us to shoot for having that appointee designated by that point. But let me pull it up.
I think it would behoove all of us to have
Yeah.
the three folks identified, within days, if not prior to the formal adoption of the Articles of Incorporation.
Well, I envisioned that we would advertise, that there's these commission positions and do like we do with our other boards and commissions and receive applications.
Mhm.
Go from there.
And that takes,
Rather than trying to recruit, I mean, you're.
Right.
I guess I was kind of, from what I was hearing from the city council, and I could have been hearing things incorrectly, their level of concern about becoming so many degrees separate from this made me think that they might be interested in appointing a council person, or maybe like their city manager or somebody closely aligned with council. And if that's the case, I think that probably sort of sets a tone, and we could say, well, then maybe we ought to do the same thing. And then you're really only looking for that third person.
One thing I would note for the Board of Supervisors, and Rod, I do agree with you. I think it makes the most sense for the appointee from us to be a supervisor. However, given the way the requirements, only Lisa or I would be
Right.
eligible.
Right. Yep. Good reminder. Right.
And then just one more thing, just to make sure I'm completely clear. If October 7th, this coming meeting, or October 7th, the city council majority decides we want to move forward with this, and then we get the articles and then we approve it, what we're really approving is sending this to the voters at that point. We're not really, the county board nor the city is actually approving the construction. We're approving a plan that goes to the voters.
Nothing, I know that there's been discussion on the city side that if the city were to construct its own facility, that it's my understanding the city believes that they have the financial wherewithal to do so without having to bond. For the county,
Yeah, I'd have to look into that, but potentially. Yeah.
but regardless of how the county proceeds, whether we proceed separately or jointly, our financial circumstance is, yes, ultimately, the final go, no go will be November of next year, when the voters have the opportunity to weigh in on the ballot question.
Okay.
But there are going to be additional milestones that Ryan indicated where both bodies will have to accept or what's the word I'm looking for? Bless the decisions of the authority. So choosing the commissioners is very important. Writing good articles of incorporation and bylaws is very important, but there will still be additional steps where both bodies will have to bless the decision of the authority.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Counselor Burgess? Oh, hello, Counselor Weiland. Do either of you folks have any questions?
I just would share my concerns with the timeline and logistics and like what happens next, and then do we have a series of additional joint meetings, or, you know, negotiating these intergovernmental documents, I think will take a lot of time and energy, so I'm still not entirely clear on the timeline.
I'm kind of guessing that Assistant County Attorney Moss has already got a pretty good idea of the things he'd like to put in a draft. And since we have a couple examples anyway, it's probably kind of models. And I'm sure that's also getting shared with City Attorney Goers.
Are you talking about the articles of incorporation?
Uh,
Are you talking about the articles of incorporation, like bylaws? Is that what you mean?
Everything got from those two entities. And so, I mean, I think they can be working on what they think is good and bring drafts to their respective elected bodies that they represent. So that, you know, I don't think we have to necessarily do all the crossing of T's and dotting of I's. We're obviously going to have to weigh in more than once.
I think, and I realize that the three of you folks can't speak for the city, but my strong suspicion is that if the city is philosophically aligned with the county, that the overarching goal of these documents should be to minimize and restrict the powers of the authority and commission, reserving as much authority to the Board of Supervisors and to the city council. I think if the city agrees to that just philosophical statement, that's probably going to be 85 to 90% of the guidance that our two attorneys' offices would need. Because that really does, I think, capture an awful lot of, the questions that might come up. And, certainly my impression from last night was that the city shares that concern, wanting, if we were to proceed together, to reserve as much authority as possible to the city and to the county. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just a little bit of clarification. I don't know if it was just misspeaking, Counselor Harmson, is the formal vote for the city council, from the city council's perspective, on October 7th, or is it the next city council meeting?
That was probably, sorry, I was facing this way, so I didn't see when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
walked in, but earlier conversation in this meeting was pointing out that if the county board indicated to us that they don't need us necessarily to decide on Tuesday,
Okay,
but because they kind of had picked October 1st as like first of the month arbitrary, made sense kind of a date, without realizing that our next meeting after Tuesday is October 7th. And so what they communicated to us is that October 7th would be fine. They don't need us to, if we feel like the majority of the council feels like, hey, we just need some more time to look at all these documents, the different things we've gotten, that there's no problem on their end, no sense of urgency on their end that would require us to make a decision in 5 days from now. So,
Okay.
So does that answer your question?
yes, thanks for filling me in.
Oh, no worries.
Additional questions? Okay, thank you much, Ryan. Appreciate the presentation. Appreciate the updates from just last night. Getting a lot of good work done. Item C3 this afternoon, CJCC open discussion. I will open it up to the floor. Talkative bunch.
I think that in terms of moving forward, it sounds like right now we are looking at what a lot of attention is focused on the joint facility, obviously. I do want to circle back to something that I had discussed or had kind of put into the discussion last night, which was, as a report, as a, initial draft facility. And I know a lot of this was based on conversations and focus groups with law enforcement and folks working in the jail. But the discussion on the number of beds is not something that we've finalized. And I do think that when talking with Shive Hattery, the cost savings of, 20 beds equaling $4 million is not something that I want to overlook. And so I wanted to kind of formally bring it up because I kind of mentioned it last night. And, Brett and I've had conversations about this. But I wanted to kind of circle back to that because I think that when we're moving forward, I want to be very clear about where I see, the facility itself is an improvement in terms of the quality of the jail. And the quantity of beds is really, I think, the sticking point for me. And as I said last night, even in their own report indicated that since 2005, we've had a decline in the number of people that have been in the jail. And so while they were using 3 beds per year as an indicator for, where they got their 140 beds, I do think that Johnson County is different. I think that even in the number one recommendation from their report was to continue to invest in our diversion. And not only that, but I think that if we were to look at, and I'm not trying to blow things up, I really am not, but I think that if we were to look at $100 million facility or an $80 million facility on our own or whatever, we need to equally be investing in like our housing or our mental health or, that same level of investment, because that is actually how we would get to the decrease of the number of beds. And I think that from a public safety perspective and from a public wellness perspective, the less people that are in the jail, the better if they are getting the services that they need, if they are getting the food and the shelter and the healthcare and the education. I mean, we know that that is, from our societal perspective, what actually improves people's lives and reduces people that are in the carceral system. And there's a ton of data and research that has been put into that. So I don't want to rehash that, but I do want to state that we've never formally had that conversation, and I'm not sure if we want to have that today. But I guess I have to bring that forward before we kind of launch into, what a joint facility could look like. Well, what is the facility on our half looking like? Because that does affect down the road the actual cost too. I mean, if you just want to look at dollars and cents, but so I just wanted to put that out there.
So
I agree with you, that those things do create, a safer community. All of those things that you mentioned. Both things can exist, and in fact, both things do. And it's not that we aren't doing those things. Yes, let's continue to do those and increase them as we can and when we can. But it's not like it's not happening. So,
Agreed.
so yeah, it doesn't have to be a mutually exclusive type thing that, we don't do this many beds based on lots of looking at trends and population growth and that. And, to now consider those data when, it's presented oftentimes that these things aren't happening. All of the initiatives we do to decrease food insecurity, all of the affordable housing options that we're trying to continue to increase. All of the pieces of the puzzle for a stronger society are happening. So yeah, let's continue to do those. That's a separate thing from this.
I have to go soon.
They meld in some ways, but it doesn't mean that with population growth and capacity of staff, et cetera, that we aren't going to need those beds.
So,
hold on just a moment, please. Ashley, I see your hand, and then I'll go to Bill.
Thank you. I kind of agree with both of you in the fact that I think what the public doesn't know and possibly understand is that all of these things are being worked on. And I think about how a lot of them are interlinked. When we have our sequential intercept model mapping stuff going on and the Johnson County, system of cares meetings, all those different things, we talk about the secured housing and how we can keep people away from jails and away from unhoused or being unhoused in shelters and stuff. It's not like those things aren't happening, but I think it's worth acknowledging a lot of those things that we talk about are such complex things that if we had the answer, I think a lot of us, especially in the healthcare sphere, would be happy to be out of a job if it meant that there were people not having to worry about this. But I guess, yeah, we do have to have that talk, and not just us alone, which we should probably have it alone, of course, not alone in the room by ourselves, but we should have that talk in this meeting, definitely formally, and make sure that we kind of all are aware of each other's perspectives and things like that. But also with the people who are a part of those initiatives, which a lot of them do collide here. Like there are a number of people who sit in that Johnson County System of Care meeting in this room too. But I think it's worth saying that we should probably have that talk so that the community understands that we're all aware and all talking to each other and all working together. Because we still hear things about people not understanding that things like care and specifically space for care while in jail is on our docket when we talk about this. Like it's not something that we're ignoring. It's just not the thing that we're at yet. And I think if the public can see us and acknowledge that we are all talking to each other, even those working in that sphere, it might help as we work towards this in 2026 to let them know, hey, this isn't just jail that we're talking about. This is a lot of different things, and it goes to impact a lot of different initiatives that you care about for the individuals in Johnson County.
Thank you, Ashley. Bill.
I'll speak quickly after the board meeting, but when you're weighing dollars and cents fee, yes, you can cut out 20 beds, save X dollars, but over the next 30 years, how often will we need an extra 5, 10, or 20 beds? And what will that cost to house them elsewhere? So we gotta build that into.
I get that. And what I'm saying is that I don't want that infrastructure built right now, but the building facility itself will have that capacity. I'm just saying, don't build out those cell structures.
Yeah, and
because
I think that's what Mike was saying toward the end. of
saying
it.
in addition to that, you could actually do even more. And I'm not interested in that. But yeah, I'm just saying from the get-go that I don't believe we will fill that out, but that does give extra space for care opportunities then, if that is like Ashley was saying. And I do want to say that we are, I want to recognize that we're standing on shoulders of things that are already being done. I'm not trying to obscure that. I am saying, what are we doing next? And so I know that like communities of care and all that does meet, and that there are people talking and working together. But even the recommendation, the number one recommendation in that report was to continue investing in. I was saying that if you did $100 million for a jail, that you do $100 million for housing, I would be curious what that would do for the jail population. Because we know from a lot of research that is a pretty significant impact.
Okay, so thank you, Bill. I'm going to go to you, Rod. Zach, I see that your hand is up. Nix, I recognize that your hand is up. But I'd like to just hear from committee members and fellow elected officials. So we're going to go to Rod, then Zach, then Oliver.
Thank you. So timing again, I think we could start these conversations, certainly not at this meeting, and bring them back to the next one. And that's what I would suggest maybe we do, is start talking at board meetings in between now and the October CJCC, because this could be a long
I
conversation.
actually have a proposal. I just want to hear from the committee
Oh.
first.
Okay, yeah, so that's what I was kind of hoping, is have some board discussion. Obviously, our meetings are all open, so anybody can zoom in or attend if they wish. And then we can come back and kind of fill the committee in and say, this is how our discussions went. What do you think? And then we're, I think, ahead of the game a little bit.
Zach.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Yeah, just kind of want to echo V's statement of, if we're planning, for 120 or 140 beds, and we're planning for the future, we also need to think about creative solutions about how to give these people job skills, how to give them education, because I'm working on an op-ed currently, but so there was 4,600 total bookings in 2024, but the daily population sits around 86.4 average. So we need to get people out of the cycle of incarceration and get them, opportunities, whether that's education, like Hawkeye Community College, they do some like trade stuff where they get their forklift certification. So if we need to think about more than just warehousing people, we need to think about how can we keep them out of jail so when they get out, so they're not returning. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
I'll just add real quick. The thing about the number is, I mean, I think everything we've been doing, everybody, this is a collective community effort. We spent millions across disciplines to affect the jail population. And I think we've driven that number down to where I don't know if you want to call it, we've almost hit like a floor of the number, like what's the amount of people really going to be diverting long term. And most of the people that we're doing the diversion world are intersecting with our low-level criminal offenses. And so I have to think about long term, what's the growth going to look like when it comes to like serious violent crimes, child sex abuse, because those things continue to happen, and they will. And I don't think we're going to see that number continue to go that way. But when I think about capacity, I also have to think about when we hit populations at times that are 100, 110, 120, and if every one of them was held on bond, I have to have a bed for them. And so I have to think about those peak times too. We've discussed this, there could be a legislative change for bond that completely upends our jail population. I've seen it go the other way in years ago when they lowered the bond schedule, but there was legislation proposed last year that was going to raise the bond significantly on forcible felonies. And you never know what the legislature is going to do. And if that happened, that would affect our population. So we can't back ourselves into a corner too much on bed capacity and find ourselves saying, okay, we'll build 100 beds in a new facility, and then in 5 years, legislation comes down the road and find ourselves right back to housing out of county. I mean, we are doing a lot of things the right way. I think we're leading the way across the state for what is a community effort to look like for jail diversion. And we have to think about if those things aren't around anymore, if they aren't funded, or the legislature dumps something back down on the locals that the population has to go back up, that we have to be in a position to accommodate it too.
Oliver.
Just some number, thoughts I had about, bed number, the current, there's a difference between the number of, the capacity for the jail now versus what it originally was built for. There's a difference in that. I believe it was originally built for like 46, something like that. Effectively, we are able to house 96 or 98, something like that.
We have 92 beds.
92 beds.
Mhm.
So, I mean, if we build a jail with the initial capacity of 148, essentially what we're doing is tripling the bed count, because if it's originally originally it was 46. If this jail is originally 148, that's essentially what we're doing, is tripling. So it's not an increase from 60 whatever for 92 to 148. To me, it would look like an increase to 290 potential beds. So I mean, I just want to be clear that if we build a jail of this size, like the capability of incarceration goes beyond what the capacity we're looking at is. Does that make sense to everybody?
No.
No. Okay, because the original jail was built with 46 cells intended for a single person. And when there was more need, then they started doubling them up, double bunking. So that's how they got to. I mean, it's tight in there. It's, with 2
Always we have the capability of doing that again on the new facility that has 148 beds.
Not without violating the laws about how much space an individual has to have.
Okay.
Which were not,
Square footage wise.
those were not nearly what they are now when the jail was built in 1980.
Okay.
And so that's part of why Brad is now at what, 65?
That's part of it. Yeah. I mean, another reason we cap the population is it's just managing conflicts and people.
So I think the number that you have to think about is more that 80 something, which has been, and this is one of my concerns, it's been as high as 116. But that 80 something is the number that we're dealing with essentially on a daily basis, not 46 or 65. It's 80 something every day with other peaks and valleys.
So with the new facility, the cells, the beds, if you will, the 148. Or 140, sorry. 140 would not have the capability of doubling up like the old one.
I think some of them could be. There's some that are, the concept shows some that are currently designed for single cell occupancy and some that are double occupancy, and then some are dormitory style.
Okay.
And then if you look at the square footage that's on there, I believe some of them are designed as single, but we could put a second bed in there in the future if we wanted to. But that's an operational question we'd have to answer. Even do we want to start going back to double cell housing in some of those?
I'm saying hypothetically, the decision could be made to expand, even if we build a facility that's technically for 140, that can be expanded based on whatever policies and spacing requirements there are.
I don't think I understand what you're.
I do.
Okay.
I think that the answer is yes, but the number is not 280. The number is probably going to be, I'd guess, 175. If you double bunked every single occupancy cell, and if you brought in bunk beds, I suppose, in a portion of the dormitory style housing, it's not going to be times two, but I do think it would be physically possible, yes, to add additional space. However, would it be legally possible without violating the state requirements for square footage per inmate? That's going to be a limiting factor. So I think that if 140 is the number that we're working with, 175 would probably be the max under the current legal
I
regime.
think it's also a really good question we can ask Shy Pattery, like what is the square footage and what would be the ultimate limit given that square footage under, under code?
And you would also have to, look at,
Is there pods?
you
and
can't
there's-
look at the total square
Yeah.
footage and do the division because each
We have to
cell is
look
going
at-
to be configured differently.
Yeah, we have to look at the square footage of the
And-
dormitory
It's a
space.
great question. I absolutely, I want to know the answer to that question.
I mean, just try to like put it in perspective. I see the original occupancy was 46. Now it is technically 92. So that is almost double. And so the original occupancy for the proposed one is 140. Could that possibly double in the future? That was my question.
No, not without additional construction. Now, the Shive proposal that we received last year and the updated proposal that we've been discussing here does contemplate leaving real estate adjacent to the facility to add another 100. But that would be vertical capital construction. It's not something that this sheriff or a future sheriff could do without the approval of the board because it would be such a big financial lift.
Have the committee or the board weighed in on I think this is premised on all inmates under Brad's authority would be in this physical facility. Has the board or this committee weighed in on that is a for sure for whatever gets proposed to the voters? Like there is no scenario in which there could be transport contemplated.
What do you mean?
From like outside, like other counties or?
But it's,
As far as the numbers that
Yeah,
we're talking about.
we contemplated it, but to some extent it defeats the purpose. I mean,
So my question is just, has it actually come to the discussion, the question of like, okay, we all agree.
well, I don't know if we all agree, but we already pay for
I
transport
know.
drivers, right?
Yes,
And they're working all day, every day, taking people to and from.
yes.
And so in theory, if you do not have to do that, if you're housing people here, you don't have to have as many transport drivers and you're not paying Henry County, Lee County, Iowa, Washington, wherever else we're going.
I don't think that is Laura's question. Laura, I think you're asking Brad, if you have 90 inmates, would you accept 50 inmates from adjacent counties from the federal government? Is that what you're asking?
Are you talking about like?
You want us to ensure
Okay,
that
yeah.
they won't go elsewhere
No,
if it's under the
It-
140.
Ask your question.
transporting people,
Yes.
right? Okay. The conversation about a new facility seems to presume the elimination of transport is built in, period.
Yeah, the idea is we have enough, so we aren't housing out of county.
Right,
Fair.
right, but I'm just asking, has that question, right, because of the cost, and I have looked at the costs, right? Because of where the costs might break down, right? The idea of building a smaller facility in county so that on those highest level days, there's still some transport versus building the facility for the highest census day. Has the committee answered that question dispositively, that this facility needs to be built for the highest census days? I understand, Brad, that's your desire. Absolutely, I understand that. But is that something that this committee has talked about as you're getting into the conversation of how many beds is the right number of beds?
It has for me. I don't know if I've explicitly framed it that way. But for me, one of the cost considerations absolutely is, when Shive brought their initial report to us 14, 16 months ago, you know, they said that if you build this thing, which was 140 beds, and it was a little bit different layout than what we've been looking at, they said if you do this, you don't have to hire any additional staff. This spring, during our visits to Dallas and Woodbury counties, you know, we were disabused of that notion. And so the only way that the staffing portion where the dollars pencil out is, yeah, it's probably not going to be transport drivers, but those, and it's going to be more expensive to do detention officers than transport drivers. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't looked at those pay scales and the collective bargaining agreements. But even though we might not have transport drivers at the end of this, those positions, those FTEs would have to move into the new facility. If we build this at 140 beds, I would anticipate that there's going to have to be, you know, probably 10 to 12% more FTEs than what is in the current facility. One of which I know, and this is the reason that I've thought through this, is because the sheriff has said that regardless, he wants to press hard for your own IT guy. And so, you know, I had been working that into my cost calculation.
And I think, so another thing to think about is you get a particularly nice day in early March and things get a little crazy in Iowa City, and the Iowa City police end up arresting more people than normal. And we go above the threshold. Now we're going to have to, we don't have transport drivers scheduled. So now we have to call in other people on overtime to drive people to a place where we don't have an agreement and pay whatever they force us to pay on that day because we can't hold them here. And so I think just a certain amount of common sense. I mean, most of the things that this city does allows for a little bit of extra capacity. And so does most of everything that the county does, because you never quite know when, I mean, I'm sure you've got a peak amount of water that you can pump on a given day. And it's a little higher than what you've ever pumped before, because just in case. And that's the way that most municipalities address most concerns, is by building just a little bit of excess space just in case. So I think that's what we're trying to achieve here. Now, how much is that little bit of excess? That's one of the questions. You know, I am concerned by the fact that we have had a day of 116. That's not a lot of space, but I will also admit that that's one day. But
We can just throw around so many analogies. I'm thinking about like a parking lot on Christmas Day, and that's what you build the mall for, right? But to your question, no, we have not had a and B comparison of here is the cost of transport versus here is the number of beds. We have had information, but it has not been presented as apples to apples. I've read the reports. I'm just saying, as a body, we have not had a presentation that shows this number versus this number.
Not that long ago, we got, before we reformed this committee, Brad, I know Brad has it somewhere.
I'm just saying, as this body, Councilor Burgess said, this body,
Well, no, this body hasn't done.
Yeah, so that's all I was just answering that question.
We're not taking, I think we're also coming to, we didn't want to come to this body. We would have had to form this committee 8 years ago to get everybody, quote unquote, up to speed. We wanted to bring some stuff to this committee to let them dissect it, kick it around, stuff like that, but not to start from.
Oh, and I'm not suggesting that. I'm not sure that that's what she was insinuating. I think that there's always an opportunity to provide more information. And if the body needs that.
I'm going to address that in
Yeah.
just a moment. I just want to recognize that we're almost out of time.
Sure.
I'd like to give Michelle and Sean an opportunity, and then I will present what my idea is, please.
I guess I would like more conversation about beds, because even in this conversation, I feel like I learned a ton that I didn't know, like even hearing like there was maybe some possibility that things could not be 100% built out, but I didn't, if that is a thing or not a thing. I think the other thing that I have a hard time kind of grasping around sometimes too, because I 100% understand when people are talking about how like you need to have the space to put the people, but then when you're talking with the community and folks that have concerns about beds, like mounted beds, how do we know that they won't be filled all the time? And so I just feel like there's some more nuance around conversation that we can have about that, because I think most people can understand you need to have a space for people to be safe, but then also how does the public not know that those spaces aren't going to be filled to the capacity all of the time if it's there? And I know that's not a simple thing, so that's why I just feel like there can be a lot more conversation around it.
Sean?
One of the questions, getting back to kind of the start of this discussion, and I apologize, I walked out of my home today without my bag, so I don't have all the different charts and stuff we've been talking about. So the Shive proposal, and in terms of its long-term outlook as a steady growth rate of 3 beds per year. But there's a couple of things that factors in that, right? And so I'm just kind of wondering, and if this is a question for the two of you follow up with next time, that's fine. But when we take a look at some data that indicates crime is going down, but at the same time, our population is going up. So when I think about that in terms of does the math, is one, like, where does this, is this happening? It's like, so if the rate is coming down a little bit, but the population's going up and you apply the rate to the population, does your final number of beds actually go down or go up just based on those two factors? And so that's kind of one sort of thing. And then I can't remember if all the data we've got, if there was like an average daily bed count from a year ago to now,
Yes.
and if that has changed or the trend has changed over the last couple of years. Yeah.
It has.
Do you remember?
2023 or ADP was 83, 24 was 86 point something.
Okay. So but at the same time, the crime stats have come down, population has gone up, right? I mean, that's.
But the problem is crime stats are like about a year behind. I mean, I can get you that ADP number on almost real time. It seems like what we saw in the news the other day, the governor's, bragging about the changes they've done to, they're taking the credit for recidivism in the prison system. But I want to say doesn't end in like 2023 data. So we're trying to make decisions and a lot of those things based on not real-time information.
Oliver, very briefly.
I would just like to put this out there. Do we not think that if we do our job correctly as elected officials, then we will see that that same pattern continue on the same path or get better even, especially if we're talking about spending $110 million, a lot of which could be used to go into the same programs that would do that very thing, especially when, we're talking about grants that we're being asked for and we're seeing pushback for something as significant as 10% of calls. We're seeing pushback from the sheriff's department for just asking for free money to a diversion program. So I mean, I just don't, that math is not mathing to me. And why would we be investing this money in increasing incarceration when if we do our jobs correctly, if we follow the data, if we follow models that we know work, why are we planning for this future when we could just do it,
I have a real issue with the way you're presenting that, because we're not trying to increase incarceration. We're planning on it. What we're trying to do is build a facility that will adequately house the number of people that are in the system now, which, by the way, when I started here was about 170 a day. And is now, half that. And I'm proud of that fact.
That's great.
Yeah, we've done a lot of good stuff.
And this is also not
And so
intention.
I'm not saying we can't continue to move that way. I hope we can. But I've also seen over time that we clearly need a new facility. There's no question, you can't go to that jail. The people are in inhumane conditions, not just prisoners, but employees. So we have to do something. So I want to do something that will last 50 to 75 years. Obviously, buildings need to be modified over 50 to 75 years, but you guys have a number of buildings that are pretty old. Look at the senior center. You're getting good use out of the senior center, and it's an old building, stuff like that. So we've got to keep, I think, thinking not just of the immediacy of today, but 25, 30, 40, 50 years down the road.
I just want to put a point on, I think the difference, and this is why we have these boards, is that we have different visions for 50 years from now. And I think that that is why we get these things. And so how do we find some middle ground? Because again, it is the quality of the jail, not necessarily the quantity of the beds, although that's a big important aspect of it, that is the issue right now. It's that it is a sick building and we need to get people out of there. But I just wanted to note that I do think that there may be just a difference in the vision of 50 years from now and what that could look like and how do we get there. But I do believe that we can find middle ground to get there. I mean, that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, one part of the vision, I'm sorry, John, one part of the vision that's an
That was it.
important part of the vision is if you look at like the water study that we just did, and they're really good at predicting populations. You're talking about Johnson County in 50 years being 500,000 people.
I know, but it's not, okay, yeah.
No, that's.
Facilities aren't the same as.
I am not as optimistic as some of my colleagues that we will be able to find a happy medium at some point. It is my belief that we are simply going to have to ask the question of ourselves. It is also my impression that the city, given your own concerns and the fact that there are 7 of you who all have your own concerns, considerations, and whatnot, it is my suspicion that the city would like to have an answer from the county as to what the bed count is going to be before they decide formally whether they want to work with us. Additionally, while I am deeply grateful for all of the committee members, and I recognize that we have a couple other elected folks on this committee, at the end of the day, I believe it is the responsibility of the Board of Supervisors to make that determination. This is a huge committee. Our attendance is all over the place. And we are the 5 folks who, at the end of the day, are accountable to our constituents in this matter. So what I would like to propose is that we communicate, whether individually or have Jill collate stuff or whatnot, the questions that we have remaining, the square footage analysis, get those to Shive, ask Shive to expedite their analysis, but try and keep those questions manageable so that Shive can turn that around as expeditiously as possible. Now, the question I have for the supervisors especially, but also for the committee members, is I would like us to discuss this in work session next Wednesday and vote just on motion, or maybe I'll write a resolution again or something to put this question to bed 2 weeks from today on the 25th of September. Committee members, what say you?
You're talking the bed question specifically?
Bed questions?
Any other questions though, right?
Well, any questions you have to Shive, but no.
Just
2 weeks from today,
Okay.
we are going to say it's going to be 120 beds, it's going to be 140 beds, it's going to be 137.2, whatever that is. Because as I said, it has been my vision to let this thing run as long as possible to ensure that the community is well informed, that the supervisors and the committee members are well informed, but most of all, so that everybody feels like they have had an opportunity to express their views, opinions, and damned importantly, values. I think, to Rod's point, yes, we could do this for 8 years, but I think that we have done this, we have held this process open as long as we can while still maintaining a responsible course forward. And that is what I would propose.
Clarification.
Please.
Are you proposing that this committee, which is to schedule an extra meeting? I think the next meeting is scheduled for October 9th.
No, I believe
You're talking about a committee of the Board of Supervisors.
just the supervisors.
Oh,
At our regular work session next Wednesday, we'll discuss.
I didn't know if you
Yeah.
were asking all of us
No,
or just your colleagues.
Thank you for that clarification.
I think I would be fine with that. I do want to hear, and so I would ask other committee members to get questions to us that we need to get answered from Shive, or any comments that you have to Erin. She can then forward it to the entire board. And without, addressing like quorum issues. So I do want to make sure, and the public as well, like if there are things that we need to be looking at that we're not looking at, I know, there's just been, a lot of lists, public health, and, those kinds of things that I do think we want to vet, and I want to handle on before we walk into these kinds of, this vote, which, yes, I'm fine with. But I would like to get information from everybody.
We'll all be able to zoom in.
And that would be during your regular.
Wednesday.
So I will memorialize the proposal now. It would be that the Board of Supervisors, not this committee, that the Board of Supervisors in work session at 9 a.m. next Wednesday, 17th September, have this discussion, receive whatever information Shive can present to us, and then have a formal vote setting the number of beds that we intend to construct at our regular formal meeting at 9 a.m. on Thursday, 25 September.
Wednesday, and then the following Thursday week. Yeah.
One amendment, please have questions to me by the end of the day tomorrow to give Shive adequate time to, give some numbers if that's possible, or even this weekend, through Sunday night, I'll compile and get them to Shive, but we do need to give them some grace in formalizing some responses, so. Yes.
Good point.
I'm out of town next week.
Are you out of town for the next 2 weeks?
Just next.
Brad,
Give you.
I just blew up my own fucking vacation. So let's do it.
For next week?
No, for the week that we're going to take the formal vote.
Oh, that's no problem.
So,
I'll be here in 2 weeks.
well, I will be too, because I just canceled my vacation.
This isn't vacation. It's work. Point is, I don't know, I'll send you something in writing where I'm at, but, I mean, I just realized I'm certain there's a number here where this falls apart. If the city's in a position where the number is just not realistic, then we know the direction we're going. And I mean, either way, I'm glad to see this point is coming because we need to know where we're headed. But, I mean, there's a number that winds up being unrealistic.
The office.
Okay.
He's not supposed to be here when Yvonne told him.
Is there anything else for the good of the order? Thank you, everyone. It is 5:06. We are adjourned.